So China is devaluing their currency, and they're also pouring money in. Their currency is going to hell, but they're also pouring money in, and that will totally pay for the tariffs. The tariffs are not being paid for by our people. It's being paid for by China.
That was U.S. President Donald Trump speaking about the fresh tariffs he has threatened against China. And as we're about to discuss, and it is very important to be clear here, his claims about who will be paying for those tariffs is misleading. He says the U.S. will slap 10% tariffs on $300 billion worth of Chinese goods. Such a move would mean that nearly all Chinese imports to the U.S. would be covered by duties. China says it will not be blackmailed, nor is the country afraid of fighting a trade war with the U.S. So, what prompted this latest round of threats? And as trade tensions ramp up between the U.S. and China, what could it mean for Canada? Laura Dawson is the director of the Canada Institute at the Wilson Centre, and she joins us from Washington. Thanks for joining us, Laura.
You're welcome.
These new tariffs from Donald Trump that he announced, it was unexpected, or at least it caught many off guard, and came after trade talks between the U.S. and China broke off. What exactly happened?
It's a surprise to everyone. Here in Washington, heads are just spinning. I mean, one thing that he has managed to achieve is he has got bipartisan consensus. Both Republicans and Democrats are going, what the heck? Why are you doing this? This is not a war you can win. Americans are no longer having the wool pulled over their eyes. They recognize that this is not a tax paid by China, that this is every American consumer, and that these new tariffs are going to be targeted on things that could, back to school season, so laptops and iPads and toys and technology. So it's going to hit American consumers hard. Everyone's just a bit gobsmacked. Why is he doing this? The expectations for the U.S.-China trade talks were not high to begin with because we didn't really know what they were negotiating for. And then President Trump says, well, you're not buying enough of our agricultural products, and you didn't stop your drug dealers from selling illicit fentanyl to our drug dealers, so we got a new tariff. It just seems to be a fairly random grab for attention at a really inopportune time.
From your perspective down there, you say that the wool is not being pulled over anyone's eyes anymore. Do American consumers get when Donald Trump stands up and says, we're making China pay, that it's not actually China that's paying in this process? Do Americans, tariffs are complicated. It's not a sexy news subject. Do Americans get that?
They definitely get it now. My Uber driver this morning, a senior citizen, D.C. native, he says it's basic civics. We understand that if the president puts a tariff on, it's American consumers that pay more. Now, I think there was more support for fighting the good fight against China early on when there seemed to be a strategy, when there seemed to be some real targets that were limiting China's behavior on technology transfer, intellectual property violations, subsidies, state-owned enterprises. I think there was broad consensus that there needed to be a way to rein in China, and perhaps Trump was the guy to do it. But with these random shots across the bow that don't seem to be directed to a particular goal, nor are they aligned with any of the U.S. allies who also want the same thing, I think the randomness, the capriciousness of these activities are really hitting home to many, many Americans. And certainly the newspapers this morning are full of industry groups, business groups, right across the board, Democrats, Republicans saying, what the heck, this is not sustainable.
The big question here in Canada for Canadian viewers watching this is, will this have any sort of ripple effect in Canada?
I guess one could say that if you raise the price of consumer goods during back-to-school days by 10 to 25%, and the U.S. dollar is strong against the Canadian dollar, there could be a flurry of cross-border shopping, but that certainly isn't enough to offset the major pain of destabilization that this and other capricious trade actions are taking on Canada. Investor confidence is shrinking, supply chains are being disrupted, Folks are moving production out of North America. Investors are keeping their hands in their pockets. So there is no positive ripple effect for Canada. And this continues to be sort of the death by 1,000 cuts, with maybe a little flurry of cross-border action in the short term.
So in terms of, like, if you're a Canadian consumer and you're preparing to get your kid to get ready for back to school, the concern of this, or the ripple effect or consequences from this specific dispute, it's more about the big picture, long-term problems around destabilization, not necessarily you're going to go to the store and see a higher price.
Yeah, absolutely. Unless I guess there would be rare products that would come through the United States first and then back up to Canada. So potentially in that case, but more so it would be shoppers in Buffalo and Detroit just deciding to go to Niagara or Windsor to buy their kids back to school supplies.
Now, Canada, of course, is in its own dispute with China. It's all interrelated, as we all know. China continues to hold Canadians Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig in detention. China has stopped certain imports from Canada. Does the China-U.S. tension have an impact on that other dispute that Canada is also involved in, with the two Canadians being detained and the trade issues there?
Absolutely, and that's what frustrates me most. I mean, Canada is in this situation where it responded to a U.S. request on the Huawei extradition. It went ahead and acted on this habit of cooperation that it usually does, and now Canada is over a barrel with Huawei. The trade is in trouble, these Canadians are in trouble, and there's nothing that Canada can do unilaterally to influence China. It really needs U.S. intervention. It really needs a U.S. assist on this. And we saw that from some action, some congressional action this week, a resolution in Congress, and that's great, but it really is going to require Donald Trump, I think, to step up and try to change the direction in favor of Canada. And that would require a president who's got a strategy, who's got a plan, who is not behaving in this kind of capricious, reactionary, I don't know which end is up kind of way. So I was a bit hopeful, actually, that there would be some action by the president that would help Canada out on Huawei, within a couple of weeks. I'm not feeling nearly as hopeful now.
So as long as Donald Trump is continuing to escalate his fight with Beijing, Canada is just left hanging in the wind.
Yeah, Canada remains collateral damage with very, very few tools or resources of its own that it can utilize. This is really a situation where Canada needs its U.S. allies, and the U.S. needs its Canadian allies. If we're really going to make any difference on these things like intellectual property and subsidies, technology transfer, that's got to be a broad-based consensus among like-minded trading countries, Canada, U.S., also European Union, etc. It can't be this one-off power politics unilateralism, because in that kind of a war, the U.S. and China can hold out for a long time, and the rest of us are just collateral damage.
Really quickly, Laura, while I've got you here, and since you know everything about trade, do you have any concerns that U.S. Congress broke for summer and NAFTA 2.0 still hasn't been ratified?
Some concerns, but I wasn't optimistic that they would get it ratified before the summer break. They're plowing through a lot of details. They're trying to bring the two sides together. I don't think there's really any major differences. It really is about getting through the details, getting through the difficulties. One of the things that's worrying me now, though, is the continued insistence by certain U.S. legislators to point to this data protection for biologic drugs, intellectual property issue as a deal breaker in the USMCA. And then now we've got the Canadian pharmaceuticals, the U.S. access to Canadian pharmaceuticals somehow working its way in. Factually, there is no linkage between these issues, but we've got a lot of people worried about drug prices and pharmaceuticals, and I think somehow this is going to throw more sand in the gears in this economic relationship.
Laura, every time we get the opportunity to chat, it's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's Laura Dawson, the director of the Canada Institute at the Wilson Centre.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.